The Israelites are having a hard time of it this morning. They've escaped from slavery, out from under the oppressive hand of Pharaoh, following in the dark of night behind God's presence in the fiery pillar. God's power has held back the waves of the Red Sea and led them safely to the other side. Last week, we saw how hunger turned them to grumbling at Moses and yearning for the food of their captivity. Yeah, okay, so we were captives, but those melons and cucumbers were mighty fine. What we wouldn't give for a single bite of those favorites from back in the day. And God heard their hunger and rained down food from heaven, daily bread, with enough for everyone, no one gone hungry. But how quickly God's people forget. Now they're camped at the place where God has led them. And you notice, even here, even in the wilderness, maybe even especially in the wilderness, God is faithfully leading them. They just experienced a rather miraculous outpouring of God's power and grace, but they're grumbling again, quarreling with Moses. Moses, there's no water. This is a desert. Why did you bring us out of Egypt? To kill us and our children and livestock with thirst? Moses cries out to God, "What should I do with this lot? They're just about ready to do me in." "Okay," says God, "take some of the elders with you and grab that staff I had you use to strike the Nile River. Go to the rock at Horeb, and I'll go ahead of you. I'll be standing there when you arrive." It's like the people of Israel are putting God on trial. God's up there on the witness stand, and the elders are there to represent the people bringing their complaint. Now, I gotta say that if I were God here, and you are so lucky that I am not, I might be pretty cranky with this group of bellyachers. Are they just blind and deaf? Didn't they hear those waves swishing around them when I led them through the sea? Didn't they see that morning manna? Taste it on their tongues, feel it in their bellies? I just did that miraculous meal last week, and now they're complaining again, wondering if I'm really here? But blessedly, God is much more patient than I might have been, because God knows that their grumbling is not really about complaining, at least not mostly. It's mostly about their wanting to know if God really is there, if God really does know just how hard things are in this wilderness moment of theirs. God does know, of course. Remember, God led them there in the first place. The text is very clear about that. And yes, the people have some awfully short memories. The manna thing really was just a short time ago. But when you're parched with thirst, there's not much else you can think about. It's all consuming. And so our grace-filled and patient God says, "It's okay. Let them put me in the dock. Let them bring witnesses and hound me with their questions, because they need to know. They need to see. I've promised to be with them. I've given them the things they need to survive this trial, this difficult time they're in. I know the wilderness is hard, and I know it won't be forever, that I truly am bringing them to someplace new and wonderful. But they don't know that, at least not for sure. At least not when they're full of the fear of thirst that might truly take their children or their livelihoods from them. So let them come, Moses. I'll take care of things. I'll give them what they need. You'll see." And here's the thing I wonder. When they got to the rock and saw Moses strike it with his staff, and all that glorious, life-giving water came spilling out, did they see God up there in front of them? Were they aware of the Holy One standing there up behind the rock? I hope maybe they did, that in their rush forward, splashing through the water that was spilling out to keep them alive, they glanced up and saw the source of their gift, saw who it was that was providing this abundance. I hope so. But here's the thing. God was doing it anyway. God was there, protecting, guiding, leading, giving them what they needed, even if they didn't see it, even if they grumbled and complained and shouted their misplaced fear and anger at Moses. Because really, what they wanted to know is whether God still loved them, whether God was still there, would still provide in this strange, new, dangerous land, whether this very trying time really was headed somewhere good, whether God could still be trusted. Because the truth is, we never want to know about God in the abstract, at least not usually. It might be fun to talk theology and play around with ideas about God, but when it gets right down to it, when it's 3 a.m. and you can't sleep because the rent is due, or your child is sick, or the diagnosis just came back, or the pandemic just won't quit, when the country seems to be tearing itself apart at the seams, when you can't seem to make your leaders stop and listen, when you wonder if your marriage will survive, if the earth itself writhing in pain will survive. In all those moments, you don't want to know God in the abstract. You want to know God for real, for now, for this very specific, very particular, very painful moment. You want to know that even if God has saved you in the past, even if you've seen with your very own eyes the ways grace and love and power have changed things in your own particular life, you still need to know that God is here now, that God can still do what God is so good at doing, making a way out of no way, bringing hope to times of despair, bringing light into your very dark moment. When you're in the wilderness, you need to know that God knows the details, realizes that you're thirsty now, this moment, not some other time, not some other need, but this time and this need. So here's what all that means, St. Mark's. It means it's okay to lament, to be angry or fearful or despairing, to wonder whether God is still here, to be weary and exhausted and tired of this whole darn thing, to feel nostalgia pulling you back toward the past, toward the things you loved and wonder if you'll ever have again, toward the things you at least knew, toward the things that were familiar, even if in truth they ought to be left behind, because at least you understood them. This story of our ancient forebearers grumbling at their leader, but really wondering about the faithfulness of God, not about the faithfulness of Moses, means that we can grumble too. We can be at our wits' end. We can wonder if there's one more step forward left in us. We can say, enough already. There's just too much newness, too much unknown. I can't see where all this is going. I used to know how to do life, how to do school, how to do friends, how to do Eucharist or visit parishioners, how to do family or plan holidays. There were familiar things that I didn't have to think about. And now I have to, all the time. Now, God, there's just this wilderness, and it looks so different and feels so hard and gives so many challenges and brings such unknown territory where we never know what's around the next corner or beyond the next rise. Because we are there, aren't we? In this wilderness called the year 2020. And if we're all getting a little grumpy, or some days a lot grumpy, with ourselves or each other or our leaders, God understands. God knows. God will handle our anxious questions, our accusations, our fearful wonderings for us, just like those thirsty ancestors, because God is still faithful, still present, still leading, even if we can't see it. With the gift of hindsight and finished history, we know our forebears got to the promised land. We know the wilderness didn't last forever, but they didn't. Not when they were in it. They couldn't see the future any more than we can. They didn't realize all the important things they would learn about each other, about God, about what faithfulness could look like, about the new world into which God was leading them and preparing them for. Like us, they couldn't see around the next corner or over the next rise. And yet, but still, God was leading them. The promised land was still coming, the time of rejoicing and new life and fresh ways of being God's people, the time of knowing more deeply than ever that they were called to be agents of God's blessing to the entire world. All those things were still coming, even though they couldn't see them, even though it strained their imaginations to catch even a glimpse. And so it will be with us when we journey out onto the other side of this pandemic. On the other side, where God is leading us, there will be new life and new traditions and new hope, with strong roots in our past, but new branches reaching out into new places and finding new people. It's coming, friends. God promises. And it's okay with God if we get grumpy and afraid and weary in the meantime. One of the things I most love about this story is the name that Moses gave to the place. You might think he'd give it a name like place of life-giving water, or place of God's faithfulness, or place of wonder working. But no, nothing like that. He names it Massa and Meribah, place where the Israelites quarreled and tested the Lord, saying, "Is the Lord among us or not?" Moses named the place by its true name, by a name that described what they were honestly up to in that wilderness moment. And by choosing that name, said, it's okay for times of questioning God to be part of our sacred story, part of what we remember and know about ourselves. It's okay to ask, is the Lord among us or not? It's okay for us too, St. Mark's. And isn't that wonderful news?